What do we do when we feel purposeless, when the vital energy is sucked from life, when we feel no deep spiritual connection, no drive to do anything of substance? As the bleak statistics of the mental health epidemic demonstrate, for many of us, there is no clear answer. Of course, the scientist offers data, pathology, and molecules to help us cope with the pain. Clergy tells us there's something more, but for many of us, their words ring hollow. They offer no way to directly experience the supposed spiritual realities that they talk about. This disconnection from meaning and purpose, this soul depression, is devouring the psyche of millions, left us struggling to numb the pain through distraction, attention, consumption, and ego games. All of the above, of course, bring us no closer to that connection that we seek. They leave us even thirstier for something sacred, meaningful, and real than we were to begin with.
Are you winning, son?
Yes, Dad, I am winning. I am winning. I have everything. Everything. Virtue, love, opinion, science, conscience, at the click of a button, at the swipe of a card. But something's missing, Dad. This just isn't it. It's all dust. I have yearned for inalienable passions, relations, but it's all been turned to objects of exchange. Everything is for sale and has a price. The market is everywhere, Dad. We won. Everything is reified, turned to things and objects. The social, the people, we won. Everything can be used and discarded as seen fit. We won, Dad. And that's probably why we have lost.
Or as psychiatrist and mythopoetic genius Carl Jung puts it, the least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. So in this transmission, we're going to confront this soul sickness, why it's happening, try to make some sense of it, and discuss ways we might be able to cope with it, we might be able to even overcome it. So first, I want to establish, how is this soul sickness real? Isn't what I'm talking about just depression, which is a chemical imbalance of the brain? Well, as widely parroted as that stance is, it's actually been widely outed by experts as untrue, as a narrative pushed by pharmaceutical companies with no real root in scientific fact. And I've been told this firsthand by experts in this field who have been researching depression for decades. People like Dr. Chris Palmer of Harvard and Dr. Lisa Miller of Columbia. Here's how she puts it in her own words.
We're knee deep in a model of depression, which is a fix-it model. Something's broken and let's fix it. You take this pill, your thinking is bad, you take this different thought, we're going to fix you up so that you are happy, you are more functional. It's really an industrial view of who we are, that we need to be fixed, like the carburetor needs to be replaced, and then we'll move more smoothly. But, there's a lot of science that, taken in aggregate, suggests a very different view of depression.
So she goes on to say, and she makes it very clear throughout our conversation, that much of depression is actually developmental. Not all. There are myriad social, physical, environmental contributing factors when it comes to mental and physical health. I know that. I appreciate that. I'm not diminishing anyone's symptoms. I'm not telling anyone to stop taking their meds or doing what professionals tell them to do. Do what works for you. If you want to contextualize this further, definitely check out my full conversations with Dr. Lisa Miller and her tremendous book, The Awakened Brain. And Jung actually describes depression in a remarkably similar way to Dr. Lisa Miller, and he did it decades and decades ago. Quote, "Depression can be seen as a kind of spiritual dryness, a dark night of the soul that calls for a deeper, more meaningful connection to something larger than the self. Religious and spiritual practices can provide a powerful antidote to depression by restoring a sense of connection, purpose, and meaning to life." So for many of us, this modern malaise, this depression, this mental dis-ease is not really an illness, at least not in the typical sense. It's a call from deep within our psyches, or if you like, our souls, for initiation, a call to discover a purpose, a deeper meaning, a bigger truth. As Dr. Miller puts it in her TED Talk, in the context of her own dark night of the soul, I also knew that this journey was more than a disease. This depression was opening a door on a path of becoming. Again, coming back to Jung and Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he unsurprisingly goes even further. I've treated many hundreds of patients, among those in the second half of life, that is to say over 35. There has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. It is safe to say that every one of them fell ill because he had lost that which the living religions of every age have given their followers. So why is this soul sickness, as I'm calling it, on the rise? In a time where we're more connected than ever, we have more science, we have more friends online, we have more self-help, more empirical knowledge than ever before, that we're feeling more disconnected and purposeless. Of course, the reasons are very complicated and multifaceted, but I would suggest two primary drivers. The first, if I had to nutshell it, I would call a malicious commodification of the human soul. A cultural norm that, at minimum, relegates the deeper layers of who we are to an afterthought, and in the extreme, eats our very souls and our very will to live. I mean, just look at the mainstream narrative. Look at the mainstream depictions of success. They essentially all hinge on getting into a good school, on achieving status, on getting a good job, having a family, getting married, owning a nice home, and those things should be enough. And of course, if they're not enough, then there's something wrong with you. Then you have a pathology, then we can medicate you. Of course, this isn't true, and when it comes to why this is the case, well, I think we can look to the top of the pyramid for a very clear answer. It keeps us conditioned into being good worker drones. This narrative keeps us on a very narrow, materialistic pathway that doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room for big questions. As author and the great psychedelic visionary Terence McKenna put it,
culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies, tax collection schemes, what have you. It fetishizes objects. It creates consumer mania. It preaches endless forms of false happiness, endless forms of false understanding in the form of squirrely religions and silly cults. It invites people to diminish themselves and dehumanize themselves by behaving like machines.
And I guess when you put it that way, it's a pretty bleak picture. How do you swim upstream against an entire culture that's essentially against you finding your soul, against you connecting to your deeper purpose? Well, we're going to talk about some ways that we can do that in a moment, but first, it's going to get darker before the dawn because we need to talk about the second primary driver of this soul sickness, which I think is the very fact that we have all of those things I just mentioned. More knowledge, more science, more connection, at least in a vacuous digital sense. And why is that? Because there's a clear cost to having those things. There's a cost to constant comfort, calories, and seamless technological connection. The cost is that it implies that we can easily live in a temperate beige haze. We can stay comfortable and complacent through all of the above. And when we live that way, we're disconnected from what really matters, from what would feed our souls. We're disconnected from nature, myth, philosophy, spirituality, a real tribe, even our bodies and our mortality. Jung, again, to an extent, forecasted this in Modern Man in Search of a Soul. Quote, "We are living in what the Greeks called kairos, the right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time is the expression of the unconscious man within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science." That one deserves some digestion, some real contemplation. And I think on the other side of that contemplation, you'll find that we probably are the generation he was talking about, the coming generation who would have to deal with this might of technology and science, as he put it. So now, as promised, what can we really do about this soul sickness? Don't worry, I have an irrefutable, complete, very simple recipe for you. I jest, of course, but here are some ideas. So first, I know it just sounds like I'm being rebellious by saying this, but I truly believe it. I truly believe that to an extent, we need to misbehave. We need to rebel against culture, as Terence McKenna was saying. And by this, I don't mean start shoplifting. I don't mean stop using your blinker in the parking lot. I don't mean leave your shopping cart in the parking lot. We need to maintain parking lot etiquette, I guess is what I'm saying. That is one part of culture that we can't do without. So what do I mean? I mean we need to rebel against the cultural conditioning that insults our souls, against the people who want to use you as a drone. And to do that, we're going to need to break the mold. We're going to need to say no to things and relationships and products and jobs that insult who we are at our cores. That, I'll say it again, insult our souls, don't contribute or harmonize with our higher selves. And we're also just going to generally need to rebel by rejecting the materialistic trappings of success and prioritizing our personal evolution. Another quote from Terence McKenna to this effect: "We empower our existence by insisting on our own authenticity." I really do believe all of that, but I know it's kind of vague and kind of grandiose, so I'll get more specific. Largely, this soul sickness is a call for reconnection with those deep elements of life I've already hinted at. Reconnection with nature, with myth, philosophy, spirituality, our bodies, the deeper parts of our own psyche, and a call to connect with other quality human beings who are on that same quest. Also, I think another thing we've already touched on is a potent medicine, in that we need to reframe our depression, our malaise, our anxiety, not as a illness, not as a pathology, but as a cry for initiation, for a rite of passage, as a psychic growing pain. A truly necessary step on the journey of becoming who you are, as admittedly kind of cheesy as that sounds. Because with this disposition comes the acknowledgement that whatever you're going through is not pointless. It's necessary. It's fuel for your own psycho-spiritual maturation. And again, this really harmonizes with Jung's take. This is a very deep-reaching formulation in that it declares God to be suffering. This suffering is laid upon man in the sense that man is not God. He is not united but divided. He suffers from the yearning and necessity to find unity. And what is this unity that we're seeking? It's the exact kind of reconnection I've been talking about. And I'll admit, the more specific we get, the more unanswerable it is, because there is no one-size-fits-all answer. The answer is going to vary from individual to individual. And to an extent, this is why Jung's method was called individuation. This is why his chosen framework of personal evolution rested within the psyche of the individual, because it's about, in part, becoming truly unique through becoming whole in a psycho-spiritual sense. And I want to come back to McKenna again here, because his personal ethos really fits in with this as well. As he put it, quote, "Reject isms, seek personal truth." And by the way, by rejecting isms, he does not mean to brush aside the philosophy and spiritual traditions of the world. In fact, he was a voracious reader of them, as was Jung. And I think he would say, and Jung would say, that through studying them, we gain the ability to separate what's useful from what isn't, so that we can build the philosophical and spiritual nuance to really develop, to really find that path to personal wholeness. And on that note, though I will not be able to fully dive into it in this video, we can't skip over Jung's method. We can't skip over individuation, because I think it is the symbolic psychological framework for finding personal meaning and connecting to deeper purpose. So what is individuation? Put simply, it's an archetypal multi-step process of investigating and integrating your own psyche. And practically speaking, this may entail a lot of things: working with a therapist, working on your dreams, meditating, journaling, creativity, guided imaginal exercises. And the first real step on that process is confronting the unconscious and what's popularly called the shadow. This in itself is a much deeper discussion. In fact, I have a whole video on it. Highly encourage you to check it out after this one for more context. In really bringing all of this together, McKenna actually had great admiration for Jung. In fact, in a talk that you can watch here, he actually admits that in his earlier years, he wanted to be a Jungian analyst. And if you know anything about McKenna, you know that his obvious addendum, add-on to Jung's method, is to seek personal, transformative, mystical experiences. For McKenna, this was through plant medicines and through reconnecting with nature and the deeper layers of our mind through visionary molecules. And of course, this visionary path is going to immediately turn some of you off, but I can say from firsthand experience, and you don't need to listen to me, there's mounting scientific evidence to this effect as well. It is a way to quickly change your mind and reconnect with the sacred. The next thing I have to mention that is vitally important, that I know you've heard before, but I really want to drive home because there's a lot of data on this as well, is the importance of a tribe, of having like-minded people in your life who are on this same path, or at least people that are positive and supportive of what you're going through. Dr. Robert Waldinger is a psychiatrist at Harvard and a Zen Roshi. He's done a tremendous amount of research on what leads to human thriving and human wellness over the course of a lifetime. And as he told me in a podcast that we did together, and as he says in his TED Talk,
what are the lessons that come from the tens of thousands of pages of information that we've generated? Well, the lessons aren't about wealth or fame or working harder and harder. The clearest message that we get from this 75-year study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. It turns out that people who are more socially connected to family, to friends, to community are happier, they're physically healthier, and they live longer.
So we need people who are like-minded. We need to come together in this deeper spirit, this open-hearted place. I can tell you that just gathering with my patrons is continuously one of the best parts of my week, of my month. I always leave those conversations feeling so full-hearted. Feel free to join us, by the way, via the Third Eye Drops Patreon. Another thing I know that so many of us are missing, so many of us rationalize skipping over, is finding stillness, finding a time to be mindful, having a sacred space. Both by that I mean in your time temporally and physically. So slowing down, meditating, going for walks in nature where you're not looking at your phone, where you're tuned in to the wonder of the world. This is in many ways our natural state as human beings. Think about what portion of the time our ancestors would have spent looking up at the stars or just walking through the forest. It's so intrinsic and integral for feeling connected to the world. On this note, a cue that I personally took from Jung is to make sure I have a sacred space in my house. And that can mean whatever you want it to mean. I think it should mean that it's used only for that and it feels sacred. You keep it clean and you go there at least once a day to reflect, to be quiet, to meditate. My favorite technique for this is loving kindness meditation. I discuss it in this video here. I know this is not easy. I'm presenting such a massive problem, but my hope is that it slowly gets into your subconscious, that it starts to affect the way that you see the world. And to that point, one more quote from one of my favorite mythopoetic authors and psychologists, James Hillman. We can't change anything until we get some fresh ideas, until we begin to see things differently. And on its face, that may not sound that profound, but when you read more of his writing, you'll see that it's all to the effect of what we're talking about. It's all to the effect of making the world more sacred, bigger, more mysterious than we can understand, and connecting deeper to it. And if you can wake up to that world, you won't be able to help but feel more connected and more purposeful. So much love for watching, my friends. If I didn't say it already, my name is Michael Phillip. I hope this was something of a spiritual balm for you. Don't forget to tickle the algorithm with a like and a sub. It is truly important as it helps increase the circumference of our psychic splash. I hope you'll also consider supporting these transmissions via the Third Eye Drops Patreon, where we gather bi-monthly for a book club, for a Wonder Gym hang. We have a patron-only Discord, and you get rewards. And with that, my fellow sentient sacks of stardust, I will see you in the next transmission.